Imagine about 1,000 of these chaps marching down the field towards you, the drums beating, and these muskets firing. Is going to be absolutely terrifying. No, it was quite an accurate weapon. Oh, that's a bit better, isn't it? It was quite an accurate weapon, but it was still the massive lead shot that was coming across the field that did the damage. And when the cannons fired, of course, you might even be able to see the cannonball in flight as it came bouncing across the field to you. There's one story of a soldier, an enemy soldier, trying to stop the cannonball bouncing by putting his foot and stopping it like a football. Of course, it blew his foot off, and then the ball carried on through several ranks of men. You can also see the smoke coming from the muskets. So imagine that on a still day. It's quite a windy day today, isn't it? But you've got that hanging about on the battlefield. So the battlefield of the 1800s was a particularly grim place, with the weight of balls flying about, the smoke, the fire and the noise, and the screams of the wounded, of course. You see the officer carrying the colour. He will defend that colour with his life. And the men falling back onto the colour, ready to defend it against the onslaught of the enemy. Now the War of 1812, and of course it's the anniversary of that war this very year, where it was remarkable, being fought in Canada and North America. Difficult to believe now that we were fighting the Americans, but our friends and allies for many, many years. And of course on August bank holiday, there will be a recreation of that, a commemoration of the War of 1812 inside the castle, where the 41st and many other regiments, including some from abroad, will be coming over to do this. So if you fancy seeing even more cannon than this one, and many, many more muskets going off, that'll be the place to be on August bank holiday. Now when you look at the uniform of the redcoats, they don't exactly blend into the countryside, do they? They stand out with a bright red coat and those white cross straps. It's an invitation to be shot at, really. But the idea was to give this impression of flash, this wonderful impression of superiority to the enemy. So your brass was polished up, so it was shining. Your belts were painted white with blanco, and your red belts brushed off fresh, so they looked impressive on the battlefield. And it was to intimidate the enemy, to impress the enemy. Many years later, of course, during the Boer War, we adopted khaki, so that we blended in. But that was a different form of warfare. That was more guerrilla warfare, whereas this is standing out straight in the field of battle and facing the enemy. Now you see the cannon being advanced closer towards our position over here. To be honest, I'm getting a little bit worried. I just hope that the windows on the commentary wagon will stand up to the shot. I hope that the tents behind us will stand up to the shot. So the order being given to fire. There was no guarantee that these guns were going to go off, of course. They were far better than the old matchlocks of the English Civil War period, where you were just placing a piece of burning cloth down into the pan and hoping that the gun would explode. That was a particularly loud one. And they've been replaced now by the flintlock, where a piece of flint is straight down onto the pan there by a spring mechanism, and that flint will cause a spark which will fire off the gun. But of course in damp conditions it's not going to happen, and if you're using a bad flint, well, the flint could chip. So you always carry spare flints with you. Before battle you made sure that they were sharp and they were to hand. So if your gun didn't go off, well, you were in a bit of a mess. You'll also see when they're loaded, those guns, the charges are pushed down with a ramrod, and many a soldier fired his ramrod towards the enemy, and of course then he couldn't use his gun, because if you can't load it, you can't fire it. I would actually see in the windows here on the commentary wagon flexing quite nicely. And Chris Dale from the Museum of the Firing Line is just looking a little bit worried at this now. You see the smoke curling up there, and again, imagine that on a battlefield with thousands of men, maybe 20,000 men on each side. Smoke covering the field, and the noise of the drums beating, quite a terrifying aspect. And finally they're pushing their way across to halfway, advancing on the enemy with a very determined gait. And you can see that the man in the middle is going to hang fire there. Pouring some more powder into the pan in the hope that it's going to fire. Pushing it home with the ramrod as the next rank marches forward. So we see the cannon preparing another shot and moving the cannon forward. It's very difficult to manoeuvre these pieces over the field of battle. They were prime aiming points as well. The enemy artillery is aiming towards them as well as to the opposing troops. You need to take out your enemy's cannon. That's what's causing the damage. And Sergeant Rogers there, preparing the men. You're taking the aim. And they're firing. If you look, 2 of them didn't actually go off. That was the sort of proportion that we were looking at on the battlefield. And finally, forming up into close formation. One last shot from the cannon. The colours safely behind the ranks of the 41st. Ladies and gentlemen, the 41st Regiment of Foot. Shoulder to shoulder marching triumphantly here, and the cannon coming up behind. So can we have a big round of applause for the 41st and for the cannoneers.